to the All Around Adventure Podcast, the show where you hear amazing tales from afar and the all-important life lessons that go along with them. Here's your host, Josh Guerrero.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? It is Josh Guerrero here, and welcome to the All Around Adventure Podcast. Whether you're joining me for the first time or if you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, I certainly do want to welcome you here. And as always, I want to thank you for being here today, just because I know you're busy and you have a lot going on. And I also know that there's a lot out there on the internet these days that's trying to get your attention. But it just means so much to me that you've chosen to download and listen to this podcast. Now, if you are in fact new to this podcast and you're not entirely sure what we're all about here, this is a show where you hear amazing tales from afar and get the all-important life lessons that go along with them. Those will, of course, be stories from myself as well as the amazing guests that I welcome on this podcast. But in this episode, you just have me today. This is a solo cast. I don't really have a fancy name for these solo casts like I used to in the past. This is just simply the solo show, I suppose. And like I said, I'm going to be sharing some of my own stories, my own thoughts and ideas with you all today, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Now, it is October, the month of Halloween, which, if you've been listening to the podcast for perhaps any length of time, you would know that Halloween is definitely my favorite holiday. So for this month, at least for the solo episodes, I want to try to stick with the occasion and cover some spooky tales from some of my travels and adventures with you all today. So if you're looking for my usual life lessons and personal development, you can certainly check some of my previous episodes where I do talk about those things. But today is really just going to be story time, or just spooky story time. And of course, that's why I'm kind of using my raspy voice. And if you're watching the video on YouTube, I am doing the typical campfire tales thing where I'm holding a flashlight underneath my face in a completely darkened out room to really kind of sort of set the ambiance here. So with that, let's go ahead and get into today's story. Now, the title for this episode is A Monster in Michigan ? Because that's something I'm wondering right now with what had happened to me when I was traveling through Michigan on a through hike about 3 years ago. Now, some of you might remember I hiked across the entire state of Michigan for charity to raise money for a nonprofit that helps veterans. I started in the Upper Peninsula on the Wisconsin-Michigan state line, walked all the way across the Upper Peninsula, and as soon as I made it across the bridge, I walked the entire length of Michigan's Lower Peninsula as well and ended up in Ohio. But along the way, there were some interesting things that had happened out in those woods when I was totally alone and away from civilization. But to start this story off with, I want to go back up to the Upper Peninsula here. And I was hiking through the Manistee National Forest, and I had made it to a shelter for a night, which this was very, very nice because I had wooden walls all around me. I had an elevated plank where I could lay out my sleeping pad and sleeping bag, get a good night's sleep, be completely screened off from outside insects and things like that. And it was really nice. And then I was slated for a little bit of a break the next day. So this was a good way to wind down a day of hiking. And it was definitely good that I was staying in that shelter that night because in the distance, I heard the howling of wolves. And I tell you, everyone, when you hear wolves howl out in the forest in the middle of nowhere, it is one of the most beautiful songs that nature will ever sing. However, I couldn't help but just feel chill to the bone because even though wolves are one of my favorite animals and they're absolutely beautiful, there's no way I can underestimate them. I know that they are powerful, powerful creatures. And should I ever come on the wolf's bad side, I'm about as good as gone. So it was that night I was very, very glad that I was in an encased shelter should the wolves happen to come my way. And that was not the first time I heard wolves out in the wild, however. I've heard them in Isle Royale, which is also in Michigan, in Lake Superior. So by this time, I do have a pretty decent understanding of what wolves sound like. Now let's fast forward a little bit later into my journey going across Michigan. And I was in the Manistee National Forest in Michigan's Lower Peninsula. I was hiking through Wexford County, and I was deep in the woods. And one night I decided to set up my tent once I made it to a little bit of a higher elevated platform, kind of like a plateau. And at first I wasn't sure if I really wanted to do the elevation gain to make it there, and I thought about maybe pitching my tent early. However, I was really glad that I did. And I think part of my mindset there was that I didn't want to have to do the steep climb first thing in the morning. I just wanted a nice little gentle start to the day. So I decided to do the climb before I called it a day and set up camp. And I found a nice spot towards the edge of the plateau, overlooking the river valley down below. And that night I'm getting settled into my tent, getting ready to drift off to sleep. And then once again I heard that sound, that familiar sound of a wolf howling in the distance. And then I pulled out my phone to try to see if I can capture some audio. But what I heard next was just a bunch of yelping sounds, which at first I thought might have been just a bunch of wolves playing down there in the river valley. And I captured those sounds, but I was really kind of glad that those sounds were happening deep down in the valley while I was high up on this plateau, which hopefully would mean that the wolves wouldn't stumble upon my tent throughout the night. At least that's what I thought. Now, the next day, once I got a little bit of cell service, I posted a story to my Facebook page with the sound that I've got. And I got an interesting reply from a trail angel who had housed me earlier on in my trek. Actually, not too early from this, though. She lived within the vicinity. And she told me, "Josh, those are coyotes. We don't have wolves here." And I was a bit perplexed by this because I feel very, very confident that I heard a wolf howling that night. So if there's no wolves there, what did I hear? And this made me think of something, a legend that I've heard when I was younger. And that is that Michigan has had sightings of a cryptid dating all the way back to the late 19th century, beginning in Wexford County, a place where I just happened to be hiking through. And this cryptid, it has been come to be known as the Michigan Dogman. And those who have claimed to see the Dogman describe it as a 7-foot-tall bipedal creature that kind of looked like a werewolf with bright amber eyes. So now I can't help but ask myself if, in fact, my friend, the trail angel, was correct that there are no wolves there, and I heard a wolf howling. What if I didn't actually hear any wolves, as she said? What if I heard the Michigan Dogman and the yelping of the coyotes that I heard as well? Was this Michigan Dogman attacking a pack of coyotes? And these coyotes were yelping, fearing for their lives as they were being pursued by this monstrous beast. Now, when I look back on it, man, it just feels kind of eerie to think about. Wexford County, the first sightings of the Michigan Dogman. And then maybe I might have actually heard it that night. And again, I'm just very glad that I decided to make that climb to the top of the plateau and pitch my tent up there. Because had I remained down in the river valley, whatever made that sound could have had stumbled upon my camp, could have heard me breathing in the night sleeping, because I highly doubt that my flimsy tent would protect me in any sort of way against a creature of legend that is that big and that powerful. Crazy to think about. All right, everyone, that's it for today's story. I hope you enjoyed it. as we kick off the month of October. I'm sure I'm going to have some more stories in the pipeline for you as we get towards Halloween. So be on the lookout for that. Have a spooky week, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the All Around Adventure Podcast. For more information and resources, head over to allaroundadventure.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast directory. And until next time, be safe, happy travels, and always move forward.